So let's address this principles of training idea. And the way I like to think about it are that the POTs, the principles of training, they make or cause, tried to write make and cause together there. Let's do it correctly. They make training, and the word I want to use here is effective. Okay, in other words, if we follow these rules, these guidelines, the training that we do is going to be effective. It's going to work. That's what this means, and that's the idea that we really sort of want to drill home here. Now, I'm going to teach you this through some kind of acronym, I suppose I'm going to call it, and the acronym is SP. I'm going to definitely forget which colour's which exactly. Got loads of different yellows. We've got an O. We're going to put a couple of R's in, so just bear with me as I drag you down. We're going to have an R. We're going to have an R, and we're going to have down here a T. Now, just be aware that there is another extension to this that I'm going to introduce you to in due course. But for now, let's focus on this sort of notion of sport here as the different principles of training. I'll introduce you to the last four in a second. So let's start with this S thing. What guideline, what rule do we need to follow, beginning with S, that makes training effective? And it is the principle of specificity. There's an I in there. Specificity. So, in other words, we make training specific. How so? We make training specific to the component of fitness. So, for example, a 110 male hurdler is going to work on explosive power anaerobic energy release, and they're going to work on kind of muscular strength. Okay, so we're going to relate training to a component of fitness. It could be to do with a person's sport, it could be to do with a person's position in a sport, especially if it's a game related environment. So we make the training specific, and it would be different if we're working with goalkeepers to midfielders, for example, depending on what sport you're doing. It could relate to the energy system that is dominant for an individual. Now, some athletes will do more aerobic training, some will do more anaerobic training. We could even make the training specific to a part of the body. Think about the importance of the shoulder muscles, for example, to an Olympic rower. That's going to be really, really critical. And it also could be to do with the individual differences of the different athletes that we're working with. Okay, so for example, I may structure training differently. Even if we're doing, resistance training, I may structure it very, very differently to someone who's 25 compared to someone who's 75, right? So the individual differences are going to be significant. But we make training specific to these things. It's absolutely essential. If we just do generalized training, it's not going to be effective. Now, we also have to progress training. It's the notion of progression. And let me be clear with what progression means. It means that we gradually, really important word, that one, we gradually and steadily, gradual, or we could just say gradual and steady. I'm going to say steadily. We gradually and steadily increase training. Now I'm going to show you what we can increase in a few moments' time, but for now we refer to them as the FIT principles. So frequency, intensity, time, and type. I'll come back to that in a second. But we make training effective by progressing it with which green was it? I think I've got the wrong one. I think it might be this one. With our O is, there, you got it right. O is overload. Okay, now with overload, this is what we would refer to as causing adaptations. Okay, now we've looked at long-term effects of exercise, or maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but you are going to look at that at some point. But causing adaptations is the idea of overload, and the way we do this is by doing more than we're used to, than the athlete is used to, than the athlete, maybe ourselves or another, is used to. In other words, we shock the body into change and adaptation because we overload it, and that's a really nice way to think about this. Let's move this a little bit further. My drag's not working properly. Let's go into the first of our R's. I think it was that red there. We are talking here about the notion of recovery. Okay, now this links to numerous other ones, but it's really important that in our training we build in appropriate rest. So there have to be, for example, rest days, or at least rest needs to be built in. And it's really important to consider things like good sleep. We're going to look at that in other areas of this course. We could also be talking about good nutrition. Again, we'll look at this in other areas of this course. Okay, so this is how we apply the principle of recovery, by doing those things: appropriate rest, good sleep, good nutrition. Now our other R is what we refer to as reversibility. Okay, there's a T on the end there. Reversibility. What do we mean by this? Well, reversibility is what we refer to as too much inactivity. And if we become inactive, you get the exact opposite inactivity. You get the exact opposite impact of overload. If we become inactive because we're demotivated, because we're injured, for example, this is going to lead to reversal. Don't know why my writing's going uphill there. It's going to lead to a reversal of those adaptations. In fact, we can call it adaptation. So for example, if we've been doing lots of aerobic work and we've got an increased capillarization around the alveoli, then that might de-adapt because we become inactive and it de-adapts. So this turns out the one I've become best at in recent years. And the last one is the process of tedium, and this stresses in training, because tedium's like over and over again doing the same thing, right? It stresses the need for variety. Okay, so the need for variety of experiences. So you can imagine that if 6 days a week you go to the gym and you lift the same weight over and over and over again, it can become quite demotivating. So it's really important that we apply tedium, or avoiding tedium, because it's motivational to have that variety, but also it's physical, because if we just do the same things over and over again, lifting the same barbells, for example, don't know what I've drawn there, if we're just lifting these backwards and forwards, okay, what happens? We potentially overstrain a particular muscle and get an overuse injury, for example. Now, this is all well and good, and I want to finish this off with, believe it or not, another kind of acronym here: F, I, T, and another T. Okay, now what do we mean by this FIT principle? Well, let's take the F. F stands for frequency, and if you consider our principles of reversibility, of progression, of overload, we need to consider frequency, because the question we're asking here is, how many times per week is the athlete performing? Now, what you're going to find is that pretty much all programs are going to have a minimum of 3 times a week, and there's a good reason for that, because we don't ever want more than 2 days of rest and recuperation, because that reversing can kind of kick in. What about the I then? What do we mean by the I? Well, this is what we refer to. I'm pretty sure I've got the yellow. Hang on, let's see if I can find the right one. What is it? That one? The I, still not right, I don't think, is what we call intensity. We can adjust the intensity of training. So think, for example, percentage of heart rate max we could adjust to make continuous training of different intensity, for example. We could change, for example, the percentage of our 1 rep max that we're lifting in the gymnasium, for example. We can change this intensity, and if we up it, we're overloading, right? With our first T, this is the principle of time. Now, this is a really interesting one, because this could relate to the length of our sessions. You know, we go on a continuous training cycle and we do it for 45 minutes, but more nuance could be, what about the number of reps we do in interval and resistance training? What about the number of sets of those reps that we do? What about things like the recovery time? And I'm not talking about recovery time between sessions. I'm talking about if we're doing weight training, resistance training, for example, between sets, do I rest for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, or 60 seconds? That's not an uninteresting thing to be able to manipulate and change. And our final principle is the principle of type. And by tripe, I've only ever eaten tripe once. It was in Bucharest in Romania. It was actually not bad, very garlicky. Not the stomach lining, of course, of the cow, but what it was served. It was a soup. It was like a creamy soup, a lot of garlic, and the tripe was sort of in strips at the bottom. It was all right. I ate it. Anyway, getting back to the reality of what we're doing here. Type and tedium are very closely linked. When we are undergoing our training or the planning of training for others, we want variety, we want a range of types. And again, I think you need to see that as both motivational and psychological, because performers will respond better to a variety of things, but it's also physical. We're trying to avoid overuse injuries of doing the same things over and over again. And what do we get if we avoid overuse injuries? We avoid too much inactivity, because it means we don't get injured as easily. That is my tutorial on principles of training. Thanks.